Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Bill Smith. Thanks for being on the show, Bill.
Thank you for having me, Whitney.
I'm honored to have Bill on the show. He's definitely an expert in his field, and we can learn a lot from him. He's the National Sales Director for ELB Consulting Incorporated. Works with commercial real estate owners and investors to reduce their federal tax burden and improve their cash flow for future investments. After spending 20-plus years in executive sales, marketing, and management positions for both Fortune 500 and entrepreneurial firms in real estate finance technology services, Bill teamed with ELB, a specialty tax solutions business, in 2013 and utilizes a proprietary engineering methodology to maximize the allowable IRS tax deductions and provide bulletproof protection in the event of an IRS audit. Well, Bill, thanks again for being on the show. And a bulletproof protection, I mean, we all want that, right? Especially in the event of an IRS audit.
Absolutely. It's very important.
So, I want you to tell the listeners a little more about, who you are in case they haven't heard of you, what you do, and then, we're going to get into this thing called cost seg, and you could elaborate on who you are, and then we'll get into that.
Okay. Well, as you said, that was a nice introduction. I think something that I had written up, but went a lot longer than I thought. But, I'm a regional director, national director for ELB Consulting. Been doing this for a number of years and kind of the product expert for our firm. And so cost segregation, for those folks who haven't heard of that in the past, I mean, some on your show will know what that is or have heard of it or have some general understanding or maybe a misunderstanding, which I find quite a lot when I'm talking to people. People don't really know what it is. But essentially, cost segregation is a method to, in essence, dissect the building down to all its component parts, and short life them into ways to accelerate the depreciation. I like to say optimizing the depreciation schedule. So you can get in there and optimize the depreciation schedule, which creates those tax deductions, which in turn creates cash flow. So the real goal for cost segregation is cash flow. And I've had clients that want it for strictly tax deductions. They got a high tax liability and they say, Bill, help me out. And they say, when I'm done, I didn't pay taxes. They were very happy. But many firms and many people like it for not paying the taxes to free up cash flow to then buy more properties, which I think that's what your listeners want. They're looking to buy more properties. They're buying syndications, and the syndicators clearly are using this, as we know. But also some people are buying small apartment complexes. They're starting out 2 or 3 rental homes, a lake home they're renting, So that's where the real benefits lie and kind of breaking down the components for tax strategy.
Awesome. I look forward to getting in more depth about cost seg and why we need that, why we need to know what this is. But when does it make sense to have a cost segregation study done, and maybe you can elaborate on what that is a little bit. I mean, or even more in depth, like the actual study itself.
Okay, I'll get into that in some more detail. So when does it make sense to be done? And there's some debate about that. A lot of people will say it's good to do it when you purchase the property or when you build the property, and some even CPAs have a misunderstanding because we're really providing information and a report that the CPAs use to mitigate the tax liability. So we don't do it. We just provide the details for the CPA. But the best time to do it is now. You could have bought a property 5 or 10 years ago, and we can do a look back study. So you've been doing straight line depreciation for these past 5 or 10 years. And if it's a large enough property, there's enough meat on the bone, so to speak, we can do a look back study, catch up what you've taken in straight line, accelerate all the current properties, and then you get a lump sum of deductions in the current tax year. And people think, well, gosh, if I get $1 million in tax deductions, that's more than I can use this year. I've only got a $300,000 tax liability on my properties. Well, it carries forward. You never lose it. It's not a use it or lose it. So if you got excess depreciation, you can certainly use that. So we say it's good to do it in the year that you buy it. It goes in service, but you can always do it. You can do a look back. Another point is if you've had a property for a while, and you do significant improvements, capital improvements. If you're putting $1 million into a property to upgrade or repurpose, then there's a cost seg on those improvements. And you may or may not have done it on the property originally. So if not, we can go back into the original property from 5 years ago, and then the improvements, this particular, expense, and then put those in the right tax buckets and apply those to for the CPA to mitigate tax liability.
Is there any time we wouldn't need to do a cost seg study or wouldn't want to?
That's a great question. So if someone's flipping property, some of your buyers or your listeners will say, hey, I'm buying a property, I'm going to upgrade it, and I'm going to turn it over in a few years. So you really need a hold period, because the IRS will have a recapture rate, and they don't want you to double dip. So if you took excessive deductions in these first couple of years, then sold it, then they're going to have a recapture rate. And recapture is basically, it's the spread on the gain on sale and your basis value. So if you depreciate, you reduce your basis value. So on that spread of basis value to your acquisition price, you're going to pay ordinary income tax, and you pay capital gains on the capital gains rate, which is lower. So some people choose not to do it when they don't have more than a 5-year hold period. Some do, though. They may not know, but because of the cash flow strategy, you're going to have recapture anyway. They'll do it if they're using the cash for more properties. If you're just not using it to keep your investments going, then it doesn't really make sense. And I would suggest someone not do it. So that's really the only time that it makes sense not to do it, or if the property is just too small.
Okay. And while we're talking about that, does it cost anything if I just called you or connected with you and said, it gave you the details about a property and you did say, no, that's not probably a property that would be worthwhile doing a cost seg on?
No, it doesn't cost anything. And our firm, like pretty much every other firm, some do charge for a proposal. But what we do is we do what's called a feasibility analysis. It's kind of the terminology in the industry. It's kind of a fancy word for proposal. But essentially what our firm does, and some just use a quick model and some numbers, but we will go through, evaluate that property and identify a conservative projection of tax benefit and cash flow and an optimistic benefit, give you a range of where it's going to fall. So then you can look at that. We can have a conversation about those benefits. Does it make sense? And talk to your CPA and tax professional. Say, do you need it? Because let's say you have carry forward losses for something else and you're not paying taxes. That's the other thing. If you don't have a tax liability, it doesn't make sense to do it. Going back to that last question, that's one thing I left out. So if you're not paying taxes, good for you. And it won't help you.
Yeah. So what size property, should we start to consider a cost segregation study for?
Well, there's a lot of these, investor boards and things out there, and people are arguing. There's a lot of argument over that. So we can do a property as low as $300,000. But if you're looking at a warehouse, there's not a lot of special purpose components, because really it's the special purpose components, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, flooring, lighting, all the specialty items that make a big difference. So if it was a small doctor's office in a smaller community and a place like Raleigh, where I live, or Roanoke or Atlanta or somewhere like that, doctor's offices are 800 to $1 million. But in a small thing where you've got a lot of specialty components, built-in cabinets, specialty lighting, specialty flooring, there's an opportunity to go down as low as $300,000. But typically, a lot of people say $1 million is a cutoff. Of course, the larger the property, the greater the benefit. But we look at it and say, what makes sense for a property? Is the cost-benefit analysis, because we'll say, here's the price, here's your net present value on the cash flow that the cash you're not paying the IRS. Does that make sense? And most firms will provide some level of evaluation like that. So obviously the higher the better, but there is a discussion about single family rental homes, and we do a lot of those. And we'll do sometimes a desktop version where we'll have the appraisal, we'll have the closing statement, we'll ask the homeowner or the owner to take some pictures, additional pictures, because they probably don't have pictures of. They say, okay, these pictures for renting, but they don't have pictures of the mechanical systems and the breaker box and the stuff like that get cost seg guys excited. So we have done those on some rental properties when they're large enough. But there's also automated models out there. There's several of those. We actually have a division that has one of those. We created an automated model, and that will support properties up to $1 million, and it doesn't have to be just residential. We can do any number of properties on our platform, and it's a modeling platform based on our 14,000 studies we've done to date, 14,000 plus. And so it supports properties under $1 million. But one of the things I want to mention about that, I've had people call us where that makes sense for a $600,000 or $700,000 property. But on the flip side, actually the fully engineered, instead of paying, $1,000 for that with auto defense, or on a residential, it's $400. You want the asset detail. There's benefits to, I think we're going to talk about that, but having the asset detail on some properties really provides value, and that gives you future value to the cost. So it really depends. Under $1 million, you may want a fully engineered report, and sometimes you don't. And it really depends on the investor's goals and what they're going to do with the property.
Yeah, so I want to get into that asset management detail that you're talking about, but what about the that automated model that you're talking about? How does that differ from what you normally do? And is that something that would stand alone, or is that something that would just like get you started, the automated model, then for you to go do a more detailed report?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So in ours, there's several out there. Several of our competitors have them, and they all provide it. Everybody looks at it a little differently. Of course, we think ours is better, and we use a modeling platform. Some will go up to 500,000. Some are only residential. Some are kind of, you do some more work and they plug in some numbers and do some modeling. But in our case, I can speak to that specifically. You basically just input about 10 key fields on the property, and you put in your tax name, and then it literally will spit out the report in seconds. So it looks at that, it models it, it compares it to square foot, building type. We have dentist office, doctor's office, apartments, hotels. I mean, there's about 40 options of properties that you can select, which all have a different criteria. The size of the lot makes a difference, how much land improvements they'd be. And so we model it, and we err to the conservative. We'll clearly err to the conservative because we will defend it. And in the defense, and that's one of the things I see on these boards, is how are you going to defend an automated model? Well, we have an extra fee for defense. It's like an insurance policy. Audit doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, you don't like it. And so in our audit case, if an audit comes up, we will go out and do our fully engineered study like we would do, for anyone else for a big property. So we'll go back because the IRS wants to see every single asset management detail. How did you get that? On our automated model, we just give you 5, 7, 15, and 27.5 or 39 years. Just those numbers out in 5 minutes. And that's really all the CPA cares about. They don't really want the asset detail. Sometimes they do, we provide that, but it gives you a quick answer. You can do it immediately, and it's very inexpensive, and it's audit protected. And again, bulletproof, like I said, because we're going to go out if there's an audit, and we're going to go out and do the full engineering report, which, will suffice any audit. Plus, it's going to err to the conservative, so we can certainly meet those guidelines.
So, elaborate on the asset management detail report. What is that, and when is that going to come into play, going through this process?
Great question. So for cost segregation, you're breaking down a building into its component parts. So asset management detail is very important. So, and I want to be more educational, but I'm talking about our report. So, it's a little bit of a commercial, but again, breaking down all the components, breaking down the wall systems, the flooring systems, the plumbing systems, the specialty. For example, in a building, you kind of need the core components: roof, windows, walls, bathrooms, HVAC for human comfort. But you might have HVAC for a clean room. Let's say or especially like you have a room with a data center, your computer room. That's specialty air conditioning. You have raised flooring. So those things can accelerate. Bathrooms don't accelerate, but you might have some specialty hot water heater for the lab, or an auto dealership for the customer service, waiting room, and for the employee waiting room. So they have all those specialty components, millwork, specialty lighting. In each doctor's office, there's in each exam room, sink, cabinet, electric, on the walls. There's plumbing if it's a dentist. So all those specialty things are what makes a difference. So the asset management detail literally breaks down every component in our case. And we call our report fully engineered and accounted. So we look at everything. We price at every component. And some of the competitors, they give some asset management detail, but to get the full detail on the straight line property, there's an extra fee for that. But because of our methodology and the way we started right after the tax law changed in 1986, and our principal was hired out to Anderson Consulting, who's one of the pioneers in the industry, he just went to the asset detail from the beginning. So we've always done that asset detail. But the real value proposition, so that's what it is. It's breaking down every single component, both straight line and accelerated. However, let's say your roof blows off, and it might be an insurance claim. It might not. Maybe you just need to repair a roof. You bought a property, the roof's only going to be good for a couple of years. But as the IRS looks at it, it's got a 27.5-year life on that apartment building. So you might replace that in 3 or 5 years. Because we've broken down the asset detail and we know exactly what the cost of that roof is by building, or the entire, if it's a single building, then most people will hit the roofers in there, they'll scrape everything off, they'll throw it in the dumpster, and they haul it away to the landfill. Well, that's a dumpster full of cash that they're throwing away, because they just haul it off and they put the capitalized, okay, we just spent $25,000 or $100,000 on a new roof. That's a new capital expense. However, when you dispose of or abandon that asset, whether it's straight line or accelerated, having the asset detail lets you peel that off your basis value. And when, like that example of that dumpster load of cash, that's an expense in that year. So when you're replacing that roof, that's a great value proposition. So we like to say, our report has a 3-in-1 value. You get the cost seg benefit, asset management detail for future disposition abandonment. And during the study, when we're inspecting, if there's things that have been done already that we can recognize, we include disposition abandonment in that study. So that's really important, is the asset detail, to give you that future value. So as I mentioned earlier, some properties are kind of borderline. Does it make sense? Well, if you're planning a roof or redoing the parking lot, the fully engineered report might be $3,000 or $4,000 more. But if you're going to replace $10,000, then you're going to pay for that. The value of that is right there, because you're taxed $10,000, 37% tax bracket.
So if we're buying a property, we purchase it, we get the cost segregation study, we contact you, we've already contacted you, we've lined it up to have it done, when we're buying the property. And then, then say 3 years later, unexpectedly, we have to replace the roof. Are we going to contact you then as well?
No, you're not. You'll have all the detail in the report. However, for clients that are new to our report, it's very detailed. They might say, how do I delineate where that roof cost is? They call us and we'll show them exactly. They go, oh, I get it, because we have ad nauseum spreadsheets. And we also provide the asset management detail, which the CPAs love, in an Excel spreadsheet that they can load up into their platform. So depending on who it is, they can figure that out. For apartments, we will also do the components, the asset level detail by unit floor plan, because people that are buying on your thing are buying apartments, and they're turning over, they're putting in new carpets, new flooring, new kitchens maybe. Then they'll know exactly what to dispose of and abandon as that goes through the process. So that's very important. And if it's a strip center, we also, and I think some people will do this as well, I'm not sure, but we, in offices and multi-tenant retail, any multi-tenant building, we'll break down the components by tenant, because they change. And again, the asset detail, if that tenant leaves, new tenant comes in and say, well, I need something totally different. Owner's got to rip all that out, and they may or may not fund the new stuff, but they can dispose of and abandon those assets. And so that's an expense. So that's where the asset detail comes in multi-tenant, and certainly in apartments, which I think a lot of your folks are multifamily purchasers. And so that really makes sense for them.
So, we're getting started in this business, and I know a lot of listeners they've either bought multiple multifamily buildings, or a lot of them are getting started. And so, what do we need to ask somebody like yourself when we're looking at firms, evaluating, which one to use? What do we need to be thinking about? Because if we're not familiar with cost segregation and have never been through that before, we're not going to know unless we do a lot of research, or obviously we're going to talk to many. But what should we be asking?
Well, that's a great question, because there are a lot of people that do cost segregation, and some CPAs do it, and they'll do pretty good, and they can do pretty decent results, but they don't get into the mechanical systems because they're not trained for that. They're not engineers. So you're really looking for an engineering, and most people say engineering-based report. Ever since the 2004 regulations came out, the audit technique guidelines published by the IRS, which made this official, everybody says they're engineering-based. But there's a real blend of modeling systems that have some engineering blended into them. Some people are doing different methodologies. We use our own proprietary technology. We don't use an off-the-shelf system. So we really go into the engineering. So when you want to talk to somebody, there's a couple things that they want to ask for. Did you get asset detail included? Because other companies will do asset detail, and that's really on the straight line, but you've got to pay extra for that, or abandonment disposition. In ELB's case, again, a commercial, we include it all, and that's just because of our methodology, how we do it. It just is a byproduct, and it always has been. When the tangible property regulations came out, or the final repair regs came out, a lot of people changed. Oh, we have this new methodology. We didn't have to. We always did what was required because that's about the asset detail. So that was what the IRS really cared about in that particular component. The other things are, do they use their own people, their own engineers to go out and inspect and do the takeoff work and the engineering? That's very important. There's companies that offshore to other countries the engineering, and they send people out to take pictures. There's even companies here that they have a modeling platform that works pretty good. It's going to get decent benefits, but their inspections are mostly picture takers, and they may not be engineers. Our methodology is we use our engineers, our trained staff to go out there. We use tablet computers. So the other components you might want to ask is about their audit defense. As I talked about before, bulletproof protection you asked about. How does their audit defense work? And most people say we've done thousands of reports and we have a perfect record. And we have that well. We're a U.S. tax court authorized our principal as an expert witness, if that comes up. But we've done, again, well over 14,000 studies, perfect record with the IRS. And what they look for is that asset detail. So when we get an audit, we come in and they say, what about this? And usually people are audited for another reason, and just cost seg gets rolled into that. We point that out. We send them the regulations because the auditors are usually new kids out of school that don't know that much about it. And then they go, oh, okay, check. And then they're done with the audit and they move on to the next thing. So for us, that's really important. But that's key. And then you look at the pricing. I mean, you're going to look at the pricing. And there are times when we might be higher. There's times when we're lower. But it's the value proposition and what are you going to get with that? Because we've audited many reports and, anywhere from 5, depending on who's doing it and what type of property, it could be 5 to 20% variance on additional depreciation above and beyond what they would do because of the mechanical systems. Really it's what's in the walls. I call it treasure hunting, what people don't see. That's what ELB gets. I mean, ad nauseum, and we split components, which other people don't do. So that's what you want to see. So even if it was $1,000 more, if you're going to get on a $5 million property, 10% more, $500,000 more in depreciation, what's the cash benefit of that $500,000 in deductions?
Right.
Let's say it's a 25% tax bracket. That's $125,000. So you could save $1,000 now, or you could have $125,000 in the next 5 years. That's pretty good trade-off.
Right. So Bill, what's the hardest part for, say, the syndicator or deal sponsor in going through the cost segregation study?
When I've talked to those folks, they look at, there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of, I don't want to downplay a lot of competitors. I mean, there's a lot of good competitors there, and you're always going to get good value, and they're very supportable. We think we go deeper. There's a few out there that go pretty deep, but we go as deep as any, if not deeper than most. But for the syndicators, it's good to really evaluate those, to look at what the benefit is. And what I say is the asset detail. Is the asset detail easily identified by unit type, by program? Oh, we have asset detail, but I've talked to so many that say, yeah, wasn't that easy to find, or that didn't work out, they had to do more. And so what we've done in those cases is we just do it by floor plan. And so that's what it makes sense for the syndicator. The most important part for them is the asset detail because they're doing a value upgrade and they have a 5 to 10 year hold period. And so it makes sense for cost segregation. It gives better returns to the investor in there. You get some expenses. And so all in all, people win. But by having that asset detail, easily being able to dispose of and abandon assets, that's the key that I think is most important for especially multifamily or multi-tenant investors.
Nice. And Bill, unfortunately, we are about out of time. But is there anything else that about cost seg that our listeners need to know that I haven't asked you?
You know, we could go on for hours, and I could get really boring. And sometimes, I get excited about this stuff. But I think that's the key components. The core is it's a cash flow strategy, and the way the cash flow comes in, and that's one question that we didn't touch on. Well, okay, you get all these deductions. Well, once you've done this, whether it's an older property or a newer property, and your CPA files your depreciation with the IRS, then your next estimated payments are reduced proportionally. So the cash flow comes in as you're not paying the IRS. You're not waiting for next April. So if you did one today and had it done, and it might have been a look-back study, your next cash flow component is going to be September 15th on your September 15th estimateds, right? You get your quarterly estimated you send in. That's where the cash flow comes in. And so people will, buy properties. They might accelerate their acquisition and growth because they have more cash flow to invest in more properties.
Nice.
So that's the key thing.
Bill, what's the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
Well, the ELB, our methodology and approach, and me just honesty and integrity. Just telling it like it is. And if people use this, great. If they don't, I wish them the best. But obviously we have a website where you can reach me, and I guess there'll be a link on your website here for this. So I welcome the chance to do an evaluation for anybody. And again, look at others, compare them, and look at the reports. That's the most important thing. Okay, they say, well, asset. Look at the report. If the report shows a half a door or half an outlet, say, well, how do they come up with half? That's a modeling system. There's some things out there that are computer generated, and they're fairly accurate. You're still gonna be pretty good. But if you say, how did they get a half? That's kind of interesting. So obviously humans aren't doing it.
Interesting. Years ago they used to have those half doors.
Anyway. Yeah, the half door. Yeah, like Mr. Ed, right?
That's right.
You have half doors, but I don't think that's what they're talking about. And it's a pricing mechanism that kind of comes up and breaks down a building into its component parts. And it still gives a decent report, and there's still benefit. But having the humans and having licensed engineers do the work is we think, very important. And having a project management team that manages a process. So
right.
One of the last things I'll say for ELB is we don't require a lot from the clients. Give us, if you were to buy an apartment complex, we need the closing statement, the appraisal, and the survey. And if you have a demolition plan or improvement plan, you've done some stuff, that's it. And we're going to go out and do the work. And if it's a new build, plans and specs, and your final pay application or AIA document. And then we just need access to the property when we do the inspection. So a lot of people say, oh, I had to give so much information. It was a pain in the neck. I don't want to do it again. Well, we don't require much. You just give us the basics, and then we take over from there with our project management team.
Nice. Bill, how do you like to give back?
How do I like to give back? Well, I contribute a lot of there's some charities here in Raleigh that help kids. I know you're big with the kids stuff. There's a thing called Me Fine here. So I contribute to that, contribute to our church, and just help people where I can. So
awesome.
I try to pay it forward and help whenever I can.
Nice. So Bill, you've been a great guest, and I really appreciate your expertise and sharing with the listeners on cost seg. And tell them how they can get in touch with you.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me. And I hope I didn't bore people to death. And I hope I answered the questions appropriately.
It's an important topic.
Yeah, they can reach me. I get excited about it and can bore people because it's kind of boring engineering. When I network, I say, what do you do? I say, nothing. Or I say, I'm a treasure hunter. Because then I going to go on because I can kind of bore people. But anyway, to reach me, I'm at bill@elbcostseg.com. That's Edward Larry Boy, costseg.com. And so our website obviously is elbcostseg.com. And you can go on there, you can research us, you can request a quote, you can say, hey, I heard Bill Smith on this great webinar with Whitney, and so then they'll direct it to me and I'll reach out to the individual. And my phone number, I have a direct line in Raleigh, 919-858-6140, and a cell phone, 480-747-5547. And so look forward to talking to anybody who'd like to learn more and let me evaluate their property for them.
Nice. I even put out his cell phone. I hope you'll call him up. And listener, right. yeah. I hope all the listeners will call you, Bill. At least, why not? Why not talk to more people that are doing it and learn as much as you can? And but I appreciate the listeners being with us today and every day. And I hope you will also go to LifeBridge Capital and connect with me. Go to the Facebook group, the Real Estate Syndication Show. And I hope you are learning a lot. I hope you're sharing the show. I would appreciate it. And we will talk to each of you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.